Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and improve business processes so companies can scale and thrive. Now, people ask me, what software do I like that I use in order to document processes and procedures? And I'd like to share with you a software that I really like, which is Suite Process. Now, Suite Process is an amazing process documentation software that helps create clear, step-by-step instructions for every task in your company. Anywhere from onboarding new clients to training employees to responding to client requests. With Suite Process, you have a central place for the team to access procedures and instructions anytime and from any device. So, as a loyal listener to this podcast, or even if you just joined us for the first time, you can try this software for free with a 28-day free of charge trial. All you need to do is go to suiteprocess.com/Adi, that's ADI, like my name, and you can sign up for your free trial and start using it today. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today and our guest on our podcast. And we all know that strategy is very important. Every business needs to have their strategy in place in order to be successful. Now, what happens is that businesses can write strategies and then they just don't get implemented or they don't get executed. So our guest today, Carl Cox, is an expert in writing strategies and creating the right strategies for businesses. But not only that, he has a system and a process on how to make them successful, how to get them executed, and how to make sure that their percent of success is up there so they can actually get executed. And Carl, thank you, first of all, for being on the podcast.
Adi, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast today.
Yes. And now, can you give us a short bio about you? You have definitely a very impressive career, impressive credentials there. So let's talk about that.
So today, my current role is I'm a CEO of 40 Strategy. And what we do is we help organizations not only help come up with their strategic plan, but more importantly, give them the guidance and coaching to execute it and get it done. And so that's where about how did I get here? I'll try to do the short version. I started out as a bean counter many years ago and a CPA back with Coopers and Lybrand and PricewaterhouseCoopers, kind of right in the merging period. Through that, I ended up being with a lot of different companies. By the time I was 24 years old, I was the senior most financial person for a privately held company. And from there, I continued that path of being in a leadership role very early in my career. And by the age of 30, I was the CFO for a company that ended up tripling in size. What was really great about that particular experience is even though we were relatively small, we had founders that came from Fortune 500 companies. And as a result of that, they put these strong processes and systems in place, even though we were small. And so we applied those and used them on a regular basis. And it was my job to help execute and report these findings to the board of directors on a consistent basis. From there, I thought I was going to stay at this company forever. And what was cool about it is I got into operations. I got to travel around the world, got to set up distribution centers. Really fun time going through this process. And then I got that phone call or a recruiter to join another company, and it was just too good of an offer to pass up. So I went with this high technology company, and we grew from 70 employees to 450 employees in 3 years.
Wow.
And it was bananas. And I had a finance role as well at the same time. I had operations, project management, purchasing. We actually put an investment in a company. I got put in the board of directors for that, helped set up a wholly foreign owned entity in China, got that established, helped acquire that organization. It was It was an amazing and challenging experience all at once. We were also really, really good at strategy and execution. That's what helped us grow to there. And I had a big role in helping to accomplish that and hire the right people to get things done for that process. And then what happened from there is we had to find a better way to track it. So we found this company called Cascade Strategy based out of Sydney, Australia. And literally in the first instance is like, can we invest in you? Not only do I want to buy your product, but can we invest in you? And that ended up a path where we did do that. The CEO and I, we ended up actually investing, and we opened up the US office. And after we sold to, I won't name who it is, but we sold to a Fortune 50 company. The process, I was able to convince not only my partner, but also my wife. I think I could go ahead and leave and start this up full time. And so I did that. We grew from 50 clients to 350 clients in 3 years. And it was awesome. And what we learned from that was there were a handful of companies that were really, really good at strategy, but most people weren't. And they were buying Cascade as the system, right, to solve their problems. But the reality is they didn't have a system. This was just a tool. And so they had failure. And what ended up happening is they're doing more and more consulting. And I remember I was with a client down in Phoenix, and 2 hours into the meeting, they pulled us aside and they said, we would have paid you $10,000 just for that last 2 hours. And I was like, I remember turning over the person I was with, I think I'm in the wrong business. And so that was just and what was interesting, what foreshadowed what ended up happening later. I started doing more and more consulting, and eventually I got asked to run the global consulting unit. However, I wasn't ready to travel 80% and be gone away from my family and things of that nature. And so through some really tough decision-making, I decided to leave, start up 40 Strategy. And through that, it's been a lot of fun. I've been able to apply and spend my full time focusing more on the strategy part of it and consulting and executive coaching with clients. And so that's what led me to here today.
Yes. And we collaborated on some projects, and I know your clients just love you, and you do a fantastic job of guiding them and being a great coach. So, before we go into more on the strategy and the process for the strategy, you mentioned in your bio that you helped several companies, or you were part of basically being companies growing from, let's say, tens of employees to hundreds of employees, right? Yeah. So this is the System Simplified podcast, right? We're talking about expansion. We're talking about scaling up. We're talking about getting to the next level. If you look at all those companies that you were part of that grew fast within the period of 2-3 years, what would you say were what was the common denominator?
That's interesting, because there were completely different types of businesses. But I think what the common denominator was they had a really strong purpose behind who they were. So that was number one. They had a clarity of they wanted to make a difference in the world. It wasn't necessarily a growth target number, but it was like, we have a passion of how we can make a difference in the world. So that was very clear with each one of these over, and that's what drove me to it. I am driven by making a difference, and so that was number one. Number two, though, we did have a plan, and so with that specific plan, it helped create the how, the what we were going to do, and then we had to figure out the how. What's missing a lot of times in practical experiences, no plan ever plays out like you think, and so the ability of organizations to have the core values and the integrity to be challenged by obstacles and still overcome them is the difference between good to great companies. If you like the good to great behind me here, by Jim Collins, it's having this clarity of purpose and understanding, hey, we see this obstacle that took place, but we're going to find a way to design to get around it, even though we couldn't predict it in the past. And that is a big part of what helps organizations get to where they want to achieve, because a lot of people hit an obstacle and they just stop and they get stuck and they go back to their old ways. And, one of the things that you helped us out with was one of our mutual clients we had, where they were stuck in their old ways and they kept on going back to it. And you helped provide some insights, and sure enough, it solved a significant problem with their collections.
Right.
And, I'm literally still tracking the numbers today, and it has significantly improved. I mean, just massive improvements on their AR turnover and, their day sales outstanding. And so it was awesome that that took place. But if it wasn't for the system, a new process and willingness to stick to a new part, it wouldn't have happened. So I know I mentioned several different things there, but you have to have vision, you have to have values, and you got to have a goal to help you overcome the challenges that are inevitably going to come across.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, I have other episodes when I interviewed business owners and entrepreneurs, and the common denominator is, I agree with you, is having that purpose or making that decision to be successful, right? And knowing where you're going. And strategy plays a very big part in it, because you can have a purpose, but you have to strategize how to execute that purpose. Otherwise, it does not work, right? So it's all those pieces have to work together. You talked about systems. Well, if you don't have a strategy of where you're going, then there is really no alignment in terms of the systems, because you can create different systems, but they don't really lead you towards the end goal. And that's, I think, where sometimes companies feel they fail, or they don't proceed with writing their system or creating the systems and writing their processes, because they feel like it doesn't lead them anywhere, right? So then they perceive it as a failure, when it's really not. It's just a matter of not being aligned to the purpose and to the strategy. So how do you see strategy and purpose aligning one with another? How do they play together?
Well, I think first of all, the purpose is good because it's your being side, you're driving, and what I like to say is getting you up each day in the morning. That's part of your purpose. Your strategy is how you're going to get to your purpose. It's the how. Going from A to B, I think, is the most simple explanation of it's the specific directions and really strategies, right? The reality is there's not usually one silver bullet to get to your solution. Typically, you have to do multiple different strategies to get there. And then you also have to focus on the things that are creating the most value. So one of the processes we do is we do a keep, start, stop process. And what that means is we're about half, let's say we have a 3-year strategic plan. 6 months into it, we reflect and go, what should we keep doing? Which is easy in most cases. What should we start doing? Well, that's typically something that happened as a result of learning, that happened as a result of planning and executing. So we put something new in. The hardest thing, because I don't work with slackers, I don't work with people who are not trying to grow and achieve, is to stop. Strategy is about making decisions to stop doing the things that aren't making a difference.
Right.
And that is so hard, right? It's so hard to have the humility. So often what I'll say is, okay, maybe this is a better term. We won't necessarily stop this forever, but let's put it on plan B. Let's write this out, put it in the future, but we can't keep working this because we don't have the resources. It's showing no results. And we got to get over it. We got to get over this particular area. And it's better to put those resources onto things that are working, right? Rather than fluttering around at things that aren't working. And that I think is so important in this process to,
it's an excellent point. I agree. It's an excellent point in terms of the strategy has to move you forward on the channels that work, but they can also, this part of the strategy is also to stop doing the things that don't work. And I agree that that is something that it's overlooked when people are looking at the strategies for their companies in terms of, so that's a very good point. So let's talk again a little bit about purpose and your purpose. So just before we started recording, you told me about your purpose, and I heard it also. We had conversations many times before. So tell us about your purpose.
Well, when it was an interesting opportunity to get to start a new business where it's from scratch, and often in many cases there's been some semblance of something in the past, and so when I wanted to start this business for myself, it's something that's going to get me out of bed each day and something that I'm going to be focused on for the next decade. I wanted to have this big picture vision. So for me, my big, hairy, and audacious goal is to impact 1 million people, 10,000 organizations, and 100 organizations directly over the next decade. And what we're also doing is we're giving to charity the first 10% of our net revenues. So literally the very first check I send out before each day is not to myself. It's not to actually my vendors. It's to charities.
Wow.
And so that helps give me, once again, reason. And I also have a commitment of time as well. I try to give up to 10%. It's hard to get there all the time. But I've been on day one, I've given my first 10%. And so it's very exciting for me to help do that and to work with these charities. And I've been a part of some additional things, get involved with it. But yeah, it's my driving why. It's the combination of those two factors of making a difference, but literally giving money at the same time too, and seeing the impact it's having on those organizations. It really helps me get out of bed each day.
That's fantastic. That's a great purpose. And, you have the book behind you, the 10X rule. So you really live by it. You look at 100 organizations, the million people you're going to reach, within the within a decade. So that's 10 years. Mm-hmm. And it's really, it seems like you live by that book in terms of the success being your duty, your responsibility, right? Your motivation, but it's not just for yourself, but for others, because you really need to find that why. You're not doing that just for, okay, I want to get rich and I want to do it just for myself, but you look really at others, at our community, at supporting people so they live a better life. So I think that is wonderful. And I think it's really exciting that you are writing a book that is going to be released very soon. So tell us about that.
So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been an exciting and challenging project all at the same time, but it's going to also be very helpful to help reach the goals I talked about of getting the people that I won't be able to talk with on a regular basis. The book is called The 7 Sales of Success and How to Navigate Your Strategy Even in Uncharted Waters. And it's literally going through the process I go with all of my clients, from beginning to end. And the sales, if you may, is an analogy of sailing through to help get to your vision or your treasure or where you're trying to accomplish. And it's a lot of fun. It helps. There's a lot of analogies, a lot of stories, but there's actually some real practical things that I've learned over my years of personal experiences and also from learning. When I went to Cascade Strategy, I've always been a learner and a book reader and an audiobook person. But over the past few years, I've done over nearly 300 books of going through and analyzing and evaluating and trying to figure out these best ways so I could continue to provide value to my clients so they could reach their goals. If somebody isn't trying to triple their success versus, let's say, they're doing 10% growth, that's not very exciting to me. What exciting to me is somebody say, I want to do 30, 40, 50%. I want to triple in 3 to 5 years. And that's who I love to work with. I love to work with people who need to change who they are, because strategy at its core is about changing from your status quo. Mm-hmm. And so if you aren't going from A to B, you haven't moved anywhere. And so what I like to do is help people find those solutions, those strategies, and staying in tune and getting their whole team involved, right? It's one thing if it's just me, but it's a whole different thing when you have a whole additional team that's getting involved in what's trying to take place and getting them. So many times strategy and plans fall because they haven't bought in to your vision and mission. And so when you have this all documented and clarified for them and they're passionate about it, it's the greatest recruiting tool in the world. When people are aligned with your passion, they're going to want to come work for you. And what's even better, this is kind of the sad secret sauce, sad thing. Those who don't want to be a part of it will leave. And that's a good thing. It's hard to say because it's like, oh, I thought somebody was going to be with me forever. But if they are passionate about the goal of the organization, it's probably not in their best interest to be hanging around there, right? Because they're not going to put in what the hard, all the effort that it takes to make a company great. And so that's why. So anyways, that's the purpose behind this, behind the book. And getting people to accomplish that. I'm super excited about it. I feel like it's going to be a first edition because I'm still learning, so one of the things I didn't say to you beforehand with strategic plans is the thing I hate the most is when people create a PDF document and they assume it's like done. And It's like, whoa, so one of my taglines I like to talk about is strategic planning is a hypothesis. It's not a fact. And when we come in with that growth mindset of recognizing that we no way can know everything about the future, it's impossible. And so we acknowledge that, and we actually have it more in a soft document. Yeah, you could print it off at one point in time saying, this is our current strategic plan, but you have to recognize that that's going to evolve and change to actually help you accomplish it. And that's where I think a lot of plans fail, right there alone. It's printed, it's put away, and I think it's done. And it's like, whoa, there's no possible way you figured everything out. And so when people think about it as a hypothesis, it gives them the freedom to say I was wrong, or we need to modify and change because this can actually happen and take place. And so the book talks about that. And then the final chapter of the book is, what are you going to do next? Dee, I'm sure you have this. I know multiple millionaires, multiple people who never have to work a day again in their life.
Right.
But when they're like a shark. When they stop moving, they die.
Absolutely.
They're intended, they have a purpose to make a difference. And so I talk about that in the final chapter of, if you aren't thinking about your next step, if you aren't thinking about, a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to retire and play golf every day, or I'm going to fish every day. I would go nuts. And that's what happens. A lot of people, they think they can do that, and they realize 18 months later. And so I think it's okay to have a season of break and rest and enjoy. And obviously not everybody's built the same way that I am and that other people are that have done this. But I encourage them to think about their next mountaintop, their next peak they're going to hit, their next treasure they want to accomplish, whether it's altruistic, whether it's purely unwell, whatever it is that's going to drive them. That's what makes them great. And helping them to find something new. And so that's the last part of the chapter. It's not a part of the 7 sales, but it's like the conclusion is, you're not done. And you have a greater purpose. Going back to Grant Cardone, you have a duty to make a difference every single day.
That's exactly right. And I agree with you. I was just talking to a client that we documented all of their processes, and they were able to actually pass it on to the general manager, and they don't have to be at work every single day. And then it's now what? And I asked that question because I've seen it just like you over and over again, in terms of when people are done with the game and they don't find the next one, that's where trouble starts. So definitely you need to look at which book are you looking at?
So 4-Hour Workweek, right? So this is one of the greatest books there is. And it's talk about systems, right? This is about creating systems so you can walk away and you could, quote unquote, do the things you love. But part of what you loved was creating that.
Right.
And so even when you watch this book, he didn't stop working. Mr. Ferris didn't stop doing things. He went like crazy and did all these amazing things, but now he's still trying to make a difference in different elements of his life. And because he's built that way. And so that's what I hated about this, of where you're just going to relax and lie around. Mm-hmm. You go nuts.
Absolutely.
Most people that are creating great businesses, that's not what they try to accomplish. I'm not saying this is for everybody, but I know that's how I'm wired. I plan to work till I no longer have capacity. That's my goal.
Me too. Let's pause for a second because my light went off. I just want to make sure I put it back on. Carl, this is amazing. I totally agree with you in terms of having the next game, the next purpose, and keep going. So when this podcast is going to get released, your book will already be out there so people can buy it. So where can they find the book?
So they should be able to find the book on Amazon, all the major websites. It'll be available on Kindle, and we will have an Audible version by that period of time. But I definitely plan to do that because that's my preferred preference, actually, of consuming literature and books. And so we'll see when we get to that point. I got to finalize this. Expecting that would be later in 2021, and then also people can. I have a podcast as well called the Measure Success Podcast. Matter of fact, you are also on that as well. So, and that is on all the major Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcasts. And then also there's our website at 40strategy.com to learn basic more information about who we are and what we do.
Fantastic. So it's Measure of Success. That's the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also find Carl on LinkedIn, Carl Cox on LinkedIn, 40 Strategies. That's the name of the website. And then the book, which will be available on Amazon and Audible. I like Audible as well. I just got a text or notification that I got upgraded in my status in terms of.
Wow.
So good. So now let's walk the listeners or those that are watching us on your, just walk us through your process. So let's say you have a client, and we both like to work with clients that are growing, that have a purpose, that they're doing something good in this world, that they have some kind of a purpose to help, right? We like people that like to help, but they also want to grow. They want to grow aggressively, or they want to expand their organization and systematize it so they can actually exit to play the next game, which is totally okay. We both work with those entrepreneurs and business owners as well. So now walk us through your process.
So I don't know how well, okay, good. We'll be able to see it here. So there's 7 or 8 steps. This is like the 7 sales is these first 7. That's going to be in the book. And then the 8th is what I just mentioned about, hey, you got to think about what's next, whatever it is, once again, whether you're doing charitable work or you're going to be with your grandkids every single day, whatever that is going to drive you in the future, you need to think through that. But for these 7 different steps, we talked about the first part. I call it clear the compass. These are all kind of navigational type elements. And so clearing your compass is literally figuring out what your vision, what your values are, what your core purpose is. And I go much deeper than the average organization does because they need to be authentic and they need to be you. So I'll keep it simple. So the next step is you need to select where you're going. You need to be explicitly clear about it. Not just we want to double. It's like, well, double to what? And to whom and to where. And so we try to be very specific with what type of goals. And then the charting the journey is finding your strategies. You can think of if you're trying to find, you're trying to navigate your ship to a new destination, it's how are all the different ports you're going to have to get to ultimately find this treasure to get to the final destination. So that's charting your journey. Weighing the cargo is rarely done by organizations. And this basically means how many goals can you really do with the resources that you have? And frankly, most people fail right here. This is like, these things are so important, but there's this 4 Disciplines of Execution, which is behind me, is one of my favorite books. If you're doing more than 3 strategic initiatives at one time, at least owned by individuals, they basically say it's going to fail. And I agree with it. That's been my experience. Sailing ahead, this is really funny. You got to start. And my research that we've done with our clients and people we've done webinars with, only 20% of strategic plans start in time. So literally only 20% of organizations even start out with the chance of being successful because it's because these 4 steps ahead don't happen.
Right.
But they still have to have the courage to follow through. I like to say you get all the facts together and then you make an emotional decision to go. And so that's what I try to do here. Checking bearing, that's measuring along the way, using leading and lagging indicators to actually evaluate your success, really focusing on the leading indicators more in the part. Jeff Bezos is, if you read his shareholder letters, this is what he does all about is we need to focus on things we can control to create the outcomes that we want to have happen. And then finally, you reach your destination. And that's not just about celebrating, but it's about learning.
Right.
Learning about what happened, what went well, what didn't go well. And then the next part is kind of this new destination. It's where are we going next? And because often, with every single cycle, whether it's a 3-month goal or it's a 12, a year goal, a 3-year goal, or a 10-year big, hairy, and audacious goal, all of these things have to be continuously measured and learned so you and your organization can actually have more of a greater chance of being successful with that.
That is wonderful. That is such a great process. So right now we saw an example of a process on how to create a strategy and execute a strategy. And as you can hear and see, if you work with Carl, he will definitely get you through to the destination. There is no doubt about that because it's a very well laid out process. And you're right. It's the sailing ahead, it's like, you can write a strategy, but on a PDF, but then what do, right? I mean, it's all about starting it and executing it and pushing you through the execution, but also being flexible about it and not getting say, okay, this is the strategy we started at the beginning of the year. We're not changing it, because you have to evaluate everything that comes up and then be able to stop the things that do not work and continue with those that do work, and maybe start also new initiatives that you didn't think about, because you have to take advantage of that opportunity. This is so true. And I think what you just showed us has the components and elements on a very successful strategies, because again, you can have different strategies on different aspects of your organization. So Carl, this was wonderful to hear, for you to walk us through your process and through the journey, which I think it's great. So in closing, tell us you already said some of it, but maybe in a summary, in terms of like, what inspires you?
Oh boy, it's funny because I didn't have my standard answers when you say it in that way. What inspires me? I'll tell you what. I'll give you a recent inspiration. In September, I thought I had a basic little tiny pain and my stomach, which turned into a greater pain, and which got into worse pain. I checked in a hotel. I was traveling from between Portland and Seattle, and went to a hotel at 2 p.m. You normally don't check in a hotel at 2 p.m. And I thought I had food poisoning, and so I couldn't move forward. Well, 12 hours later, I had to check myself in the hospital because I was up every hour, getting sick, and eventually went to the hospital. And from that, I ended up, I woke up from surgery because my appendix had burst. And he actually said it didn't just burst, it's one of the worst burst appendix I've ever seen. And so what was interesting about that event, and I was in the hospital for about a week, fully in there. I had multiple tubes draining from my abdomen. I had an NG tube to get the basically all the bacteria out because it had poisoned my body, basically the process of the burst. And, I don't stop talk about a shark, right? I don't stop very often. And this forced me to stop. And, when I got out of there, it was just a harsh reminder, or a pleasant reminder, that life's short. And so even though the business had been going along successfully well, it actually was the catalyst for me to start the podcast and to start the book, was because if I didn't start, and here's the book from actually John Acuff behind me, if I didn't start, I can't provide that difference. And I have a family, and I married my high school sweetheart, and these people matter to me, and my 4 kids that I have, and my first big part of my career was just making sure that I could provide to them and that I could help get them through college. Well, the good news is those goals are being met and have been met. So now it's just what's next, and that's where it comes down to that goal and purpose I talked about beforehand. Is we have a short time, a very, very short time, and how are we going to create a difference to have an impact? And so that's what did it. But yeah, this part did it. And then there's another thing else driving me. So my sister had cancer, and that was also an eye opener, a very small cell carcinoma. And she's, matter of fact, going to be on the podcast coming up in a couple months. And that was very also life altering, changing part around that. And so one of my passions is actually I hate running, just let me clarify this, but my next big personal goal is to run the Boston Marathon.
Oh, wow.
By the way, I've never even run a marathon. So my current goal, I've failed twice already. And so this is my 3rd year. I'm going to attempt to run it. And I'm currently I'm on a plan called Hal Higdon. It's called Marathon. It's like 5th edition. He's running like 111 marathons. And so I'm following this process, this system that he has, which is finally working, because I didn't use a system, by the way, in the past. I didn't, I was just doing my own things that I thought worked best. I'm now using a system that's working. By the way, it was extraordinarily painful to get there. I couldn't even get to novice one, because I was so out of shape because I just come off of, the surgery, all the different things that happen. But that's what gets me excited. That's what's driving me. And if I could help be a little inspiration to others where they can start something in their life so they can achieve their goals in their organizations, that's what gets me excited. My success is when my clients is having success, when my children and family is having success, and when making a little bit of an impact to something else. And I love hearing these stories of when that happens. And I said, that's what gets me out of bed each day.
Absolutely. Well, you definitely inspired me. Your positive attitude is contagious. I always like talking to you. And, you really inspired me in terms of really looking at the purpose, the idea of taking the strategy and breaking it down to those components that are very easy to execute. And, the survival, the overcoming obstacles, the looking at the mountain and just overcoming them. That's just very, very inspirational. And you actually inspired me to start my own podcast because we have a mutual friend, Jeremy Wise, who we got introduced to by Owen, who is the owner of, the co-founder of Sweet Process. And Jeremy is the one who is responsible for both of us having a podcast, the dear friend of both of us. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Jeremy Wise. And of course, also to Jerry Vieira, who introduced us to begin with. Mm-hmm. And that I met through Vistage. So all those organizations, the connections, you just meet wonderful people. And I am very grateful that you were a guest on my podcast. And I'm sure you inspired our listeners as well. So thank you very much.
It's been an honor and privilege to be on your podcast. I love the work that you do. And I mean this sincerely. If you need process and procedure details, not only does she help get it done, but actually helps you to streamline and eliminate the bottlenecks and challenges you have. She's been instrumental to my clients on helping out through that. And she is a great person to work with. She is a grinder and a hard worker and is going to get the results. So I encourage you to talk with Adi because she is wonderful.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.